Well, good morning. I want to start the message today with a question. When is the worst time to go grocery shopping? When you're hungry or when you're full? Let's just try this out with kind of a survey poll as a congregation. I want you to imagine right now that you are hungry. And if you're not hungry, it's probably hard to imagine, but just feel your stomach growling. Imagine your head being full of a particular food that you just really love. You're craving it right now. And I want to show you a series of pairs of pictures. And I want you to imagine if you're really hungry, which one of these would you choose? And I want you just to shout out your answer. So here's the first picture. Which would you choose, broccoli or a hamburger? All right, let's go to the second one. Fruits and vegetables or pizza and chips? All right, one more. Would you pick garden salad or ambrosia salad? Which is it? I imagine you're choosing like a lot of people would when they're hungry, which is food that looks really appealing, that's going to fill our appetite, maybe something we crave, something high calorie. Cornell University did a study on this some years ago, and they used shoppers who had not eaten at least 5 hours before going to the grocery store, and then other shoppers who were taking care of the task right after eating a full meal. As you might expect, the hungry shoppers not only bought more items, they bought items they recognized they normally wouldn't. In fact, one of the popular things that people said, the hungry shoppers who bought things, they looked at their basket and said, I know I shouldn't get this stuff, but what the study showed even deeper than just some insight into our own habits for most of us when we go shopping, but how this impacts food insecure people who are hungry most of the time. And they looked at the way grocery stores will often market and place high-calorie items in the easiest choice places. I found this conclusion of the study very interesting. The body is always trying to defend its state, and it makes very logical sense that if you're going for a period without food, you're more likely to go for the food that's high-calorie. If you're needing energy, we're not going to go out for lettuce. Look at that first part of that statement. The body is always trying to defend its state. If what's true of the body is true of the soul, then what is the state of your soul today? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you joyful? Are you depressed? Are you confident? Are you fearful? If your soul tried to defend its state, then what is it you're seeking? We wrap up today our series on transitions. And in this series, where we've been thinking a lot about transitions we face in life, we've been taking lessons from the children of Israel in their transition from bondage in Egypt to the promised land. That's where they are going, toward a promised place. But the journey is long and it's hard. And hard is a lot like hunger. It can be challenging when life gets hard to act in ways that's true to who we are. It can be easy when we feel those hard places to act just like we do when we're hungry, to do things we say, oh, I know that's not how I normally behave. I know those are not the things I should do. So what do you do when you don't handle transition well? Even when we choose the transition, we are all on board with where we're going. But the journey is long and tough, and it is making us act in ways that is just not true to who we are. What do we all need to get out of the wilderness? Well, once more, we return to the episodes of the people of Israel and their journey in the wilderness. And as we've seen quite often in this series, whenever the people got tired and hungry, they returned to this refrain. They would say over and over again, let's go back to Egypt. The first time we saw this refrain was the first Sunday in this series, when the people were pinned against the edge of the Red Sea. They were about to get away from the army of Pharaoh and to go into the promised land. But first they cried out, we should have stayed in Egypt. Well, today we look at the last time they spoke those words. It's part of the story that we heard just a moment ago, a very unique and unusual story. And what I want to do is go back through this story, kind of take it verse by verse and sometimes even phrase by phrase, and think about lessons along the way that might apply to us, especially if we're going through a transition, especially if we're not handling that transition well. So look at how the story begins. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. Now they are on a road going toward the Red Sea. They have been in the wilderness for many years by this point. And what was the body of water they had to go through to first enter the wilderness years before? It was what? The Red Sea. Now they're going toward the Red Sea. Again, don't you imagine the people are feeling like we're just going in circles. All of these years, we're going in circles. So no wonder the next line says, but the people grew impatient on the way. Dr. Carver McGriff preached on this passage years ago here at St. Luke's, right in this room. He started his sermon that day telling about a conversation he had with a friend of his who shared that he and his wife were going to be leaving the church. Carver asked them why. The man said, well, some time back, my wife became very ill. Carver knew they had only been occasional churchgoers up to that time. And the man said, we decided to pray for healing. And we started attending church every Sunday. We got active in church. We doubled our pledge. They basically made church a central part of their lives. But the wife's situation didn't get better. There was no healing. And eventually they came to the conclusion that the Christian faith had been misrepresented to them. They grew impatient on the way. Boy, it's easy to do, isn't it? Have you ever grown impatient with God? Are you in a place right now today where you're impatient with God? Maybe you're here right now in this service. Maybe you're listening to this sermon right now because you're giving God one last chance to come through because you're getting impatient. But that impatience, that being hungry, can also be a dangerous place. And that's what it became for the Israelites. They went back to their same old complaint. They said to Moses, why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Same song, second verse, a little louder, a little worse. They're complaining again. Why did we ever leave there? But this time, they went too far. There's no bread, there's no water, and we detest this miserable food. This is actually where their complaint gets a little comical. They're kind of like a child that's way past his or her bedtime, and the child is just cranky and getting miserable and complaining about everything. And when you start to listen, you realize that what the child is complaining about makes no sense at all. Listen again to what the Israelites said. There's no bread, there's no water, and we detest this miserable food. Well, now, which is it? There's no food, or we don't like the food we have. What's happening, of course, is the people are just tired, and they're letting their tiredness cause them to say things they really don't mean. They're detesting their blessings. There was a time when God's provision of manna in the wilderness was an answer to prayer. It was a blessing. But now something that had at one point been an answer to prayer was now a source of complaint. Have you ever been tempted to detest a blessing? Have you ever done that in your marriage? Maybe there was a day when you stood at an altar and you looked at this other person as a blessing from God in your life. But along came another day when you found yourself saying, I don't know why I ever married you in the first place. Have you ever said something like that about a job or a house? I mean, when you first got it, you said, oh, God, thank you. This is an answer to my prayer. But then you found yourself one day going, I hate this place. Just because something is a blessing doesn't mean keeping it is going to be easy. Keeping blessings can be hard, and hard is like hunger. It can cause us to act in ways when life gets hard, ways that's just not who we are, ways that not only prolong our wilderness, it makes our wilderness uninhabitable. That is now what happened to the Israelites. Look at how the story continues. Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. Now, there are a couple of ways to interpret this story. One way is to question the character of God. Is God really so pitiful as to send snakes to bite and kill people who are simply acting like tired children? I mean, you can look at it that way. You can. And if you do, then you have even more reason to be frustrated. I mean, not only does it feel like the world is against you, now you've got God against you. But that's not how the Israelites looked at this story. They didn't point a finger at God. They looked at the events as a cause to point fingers at themselves. They responded by looking at their own actions and attitudes as a reason for why these things were happening. They realized that their bitterness was inviting sources of poison into their lives. And it sure can. When we get bitter, when we get resentful, it just allows poison to enter our lives that whatever challenge we're going through, it just makes it worse. You know, we can get out of a wilderness, but never leave it. It's possible to do. You know, it's true we can get out of whatever bad place that we've been in our lives, but find ourselves dragging our wilderness with us and coloring every new place we try to enter. I told back in July when we did a series on Psalms about a wilderness I went through over 20 years ago in a church I was serving. I was tired. We were understaffed. I was the only appointed pastor in the church. I was doing most of the pastoral care, nearly all of the preaching, going to all of the committee meetings. And we were in the middle of a building campaign. And then on top of that, because of the growth of the church, there was this rising conflict and friction between people who'd been there for a long time, those who were new coming into the church, changes going on, and I just got weary. So I took a 2-month sabbatical, and I started it with a retreat in Colorado, one-on-one with the spiritual director. The first day of this retreat, we sat down. She sat across from me, and she began with the question, "Where are you with God?" Now, that's pretty easy and straightforward. So I began talking. And I started going back through the last 2 years of my life and all that had gone on and all of the reasons to explain why I was weary. And before I knew it, she paused and said, "I've been listening for 2 hours now. I think we ought to take a break. Let's get back together in 15 minutes. I had no idea it had been 2 hours. So I got back together, we sat across from each other, and she said, "Now, tell me, where are you with God?" I said, I'm confused. I thought that's what I just did. She goes, no, I didn't hear much about God. I heard what sounded like a wilderness you've been through. I heard about everything that you have experienced and what the church has done to you, what people have done to you. I have not heard where you are with God. What was really helpful about that week is they became critical in helping me understand that what I was allowing my wilderness to do to me. Now notice, I did not say it made me aware of what my wilderness was doing to me. It made me aware of what I was allowing my wilderness to do to me, because it said to me, I have a choice. I choose how I react. And I wasn't choosing well. I was reacting out of the hurts, out of the wounds, out of the challenges. And I wasn't owning those choices. And it was only making things worse. You know, this is why William Bridges wrote the books he did on transitions. He said, when a change happens without people going through a transition, it's just rearranging the deck chairs. We can make changes in life without things ever really changing. And this is where we have to give credit to the Israelites, because they must have gotten tired, not just of being in the wilderness, but they must have been tired of the wilderness that was inside of them. And so we hear them say to Moses, we sinned. The people came to Moses and said, we sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us. Now, this is where the story gets a little weird. Look at how it continues. The Lord said to Moses, make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who's bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. This is where like Haitian voodoo meets the Twilight Zone. Who has ever heard of a snake on a pole as a symbol for healing? Well, wait a minute. Have you ever thought about the symbol for medicine in the United States? 2 snakes twirled on a pole that becomes a cross, facing each other. This is actually what is called the sign of caduceus, the symbol of Hermes, the messenger of the gods. It's been used as the symbol for modern medicine, but that's actually because of a mistake back in the early 1900s. This was borrowed from another symbol that was really intended to be the symbol of medicine, and that is the rod of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. This is the symbol that you see on the right side of the picture. It is a single snake coiled on a pole. This is what is used for the modern symbol of the EMT. And all of these symbols go back to Moses in the wilderness. Maybe it is not as strange as we thought that the symbol of poison can also be the symbol of healing. I mean, we understand how it's true today, don't we? Bacteria that can cause disease and infection in the body is also the source of penicillin that can combat the disease and infection. The source of sickness can be the source of salvation. But understand in this story from the wilderness that it is not the snake on the pole that saves the people, as if the symbol alone has healing power. As Old Testament professor Elizabeth Ochtemeyer says, it's not the presence of the bronze figure that leads to the healing of the people. Their cure comes from their faith in God and from their faithful obedience to his instructions. Now, what were the instructions to the people? When you are bitten, look at the bronze serpent on the pole. Look at it. Turn and face the source of the poison in order to be healed. Face the reason that this has happened in your life, the source of the poison that you have allowed to come into your life and to make your wilderness even worse. Face it, acknowledge it, admit it, confess it, say, we've sinned. Oh, you can spend the rest of your life pointing at all of the reasons you have to be miserable and that your life isn't where it should be. It's because these things that happened to you that you had no choice over, or it's because of a choice you made, but then things went wrong. Somebody did something to you. You can spend your whole life doing that. But somewhere along the way, it comes back to choices we made. It comes back to what we allow to come into our lives and into our world and hold us in the wilderness. Sometimes even when we get out of the wilderness, we just never leave it. We hold on to it inside of us and we'll never be free until we can face that source like the Israelites did and say, yeah, I admit it. Maybe this is why Jesus talked about this image of the bronze serpent. If I ask you, what is the most popular verse of Scripture in the Bible, what would you say? Sometimes at sporting events, you used to see a person holding a sign with this verse on it. What is it? John 3:16. Over two-thirds of Americans say that they know what John 3:16 stands for. For God so loved the world that he sent his only son. Many people know John 3:16, but do you know the sentence that comes right before it? John 3, verses 14 and 15. It says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. Jesus came to liberate people. He came to liberate people from all kinds of wildernesses, but particularly the wilderness of sin, the one that gets inside of us that we can't get rid of on our own. He comes to set us free from it so that we can live free, so that we can live well. But the way that begins, the way that liberation starts is when we turn and we look. We look at him. We acknowledge, I need that gift. I need that grace in my life. I need mercy. I need forgiveness. I've been allowing the wilderness of my life to start to get inside of me, and it's not making life better, but that's on me. I need help. Look, says Jesus. Look to him and just say, Lord, would you grant me that gift? Let me close with a story about a man believed to be one of the greatest preachers in the church in history. His name was Charles Spurgeon. He was a pastor in London in the 1850s. He preached at the new Park Street Chapel. He was there for 38 years, and it is said he preached to more people than anyone of his time, of course, or up to that time. In his career, they say he preached to 10 million people. Can you imagine what that number would be today with television and the internet? But the story of how Charles Spurgeon became a pastor is a really interesting one. It's because of a Methodist minister. Many Methodist preachers back in that time were not educated. And when Charles Spurgeon was a young man, he became very troubled about the state of his soul. He knew that things were not right. He was just convinced, I have made too big a mess of my life, and I really don't have hope for the future. But he was desperate for something. So one Sunday morning, he was looking for a church to go to because there had been a snowstorm, and his church wasn't having service. So he went into the first church he found that was open. The pastor didn't show up. So a lay preacher in the congregation got up to preach. That morning, He preached on a text from Isaiah chapter 45, verse 22. Look to me to be saved. Spurgeon described the sermon as really awful. But then something unexpected happened. The pastor stopped. Listen to what happened next in Spurgeon's own words. Fixing his eyes on me as if he knew all my heart, he said, "Young man, you look very miserable." Well, Spurgeon said, I did, but I had not been accustomed to having remarks made from the pulpit on my personal appearance before. However, it was a good blow. It struck right home. He continued, and you will always be miserable in life and miserable in death if you don't obey this text. Then lifting up his hands, he shouted, as only a primitive Methodist could do, "Young man, look to Jesus Christ. Look, look, look." You have nothing to do but to look and live. I saw at once the way of salvation. I know not what else he said. I did not take much notice of it. I was so possessed within that one thought. Like as when the bronze serpent was lifted up, the people only looked and were healed. So it was for me. I had been waiting to do 50 things, but when I heard that word, look, what a charming word it seemed to me. Oh, I looked until I could have almost looked my eyes away. There and then the cloud was gone. The darkness had rolled away. In that moment I saw the sun. It really is that simple. Just look. Look to him. Sometimes when we hear a sermon like this that sounds so evangelical, that old-fashioned message of turn to Jesus for forgiveness and salvation, that it's as easy as just look to him, and something inside of us said, you know better. You know better than that. It is not that easy. And we wait to really give our lives to God until God gives us a plan that we need, until God gives us an answer that we're looking for, until our problems get solved. But we need something more than the answer to our problems. We need the hope that comes from connection to Jesus Christ. We need the source of hope that gives us encouragement, that just lifts us up before we ever get any answers. Something that says whatever else comes, I already have what I need. I'm full. I'm hopeful. Maybe you're in a wilderness today. And maybe your wilderness hasn't been getting any better because of things you've done, because of choices you've made, because of the way you have allowed the wilderness to erode you a bit. This is the day right now to let it all start over, to look. No longer pointing fingers, no longer blaming everything else that went wrong, but look to him. Receive his grace. Welcome God's mercy. And put your hand in his and let him guide you out. As we close with prayer, I want to lead us in a prayer. And as I say these words, you might want to pray these words yourself, quietly. Let us pray. Lord, transitions are hard. Change can be so difficult. And I have allowed what is hard to harden me. And out of my hardness, I've made life harder for myself and other people. But today, Lord, I look to you. I trust that you care about me, that you love me, and you forgive me. And by your help, I will get out of my wilderness. I will find and have a life of joy and meaning and purpose. So I turn from my complaining today. I turn from my blaming. I accept part in the wilderness of my life and look to you to lead me. I pray this in the name of the one who is my companion and guide through this journey of life, your Son, Jesus. Amen.